The cold wind whipped through the narrow alleyways of Nairobi's inner city as 15-year-old Zawadi sat on a cracked concrete step, her thin frame trembling in the night air, her arms wrapped around a threadbare backpack that held everything she owned, 2 tattered schoolbooks, a crumpled photo of her late mother, and a bottle of water she'd been sipping for 2 days. Only 12 hours earlier, she had been in the same modest apartment where she had lived for nearly a decade, the home her mother had built before dying suddenly of a mysterious illness that seemed to sweep through the slums like a whisper of death. When her mother passed, Zawadi was just 6, too young to fully grasp that her life had shifted beneath her like Nairobi's trembling soil. Her father remarried soon after, choosing a woman named Mama Rhoda, a stern, elegant woman who painted on charm in public but peeled it off like makeup when the doors were closed. What began with sharp words and long silences soon turned into subtle threats, skipped meals and isolation. Zawadi, once vibrant and curious, became a shadow in her own home, quietly enduring, hoping her father might notice. But he was always working, long shifts as a bus driver, returning too tired, too trusting, and perhaps too afraid to challenge the storm building inside his own household. Then, on the morning of her midterm exam, a test she'd spent nights preparing for, Zawadi returned from fetching water to find her backpack by the door, her school uniform on the ground, and Mama Rhoda standing like a statue with arms crossed and a sneer on her lips. "Your father sent you away," she lied. "He said you're old enough to fend for yourself." Zawadi knew it wasn't true, but the look in the woman's eyes held no mercy, only calculation. She wasn't wanted. She wasn't safe. With no one to turn to and nowhere to go, she walked. She wandered the dusty streets, past food stalls, burning trash barrels and motorbike repair shops, ignored by passers-by, unnoticed like a stain on the sidewalk. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but worse was the ache in her chest, the feeling of being discarded like trash. As the sun sank behind the jagged city skyline, Zawadi found herself near the city center, where bright lights and massive screens lit up the glass buildings, showing glamorous models, dancing singers, and TV hosts laughing with perfect teeth. She paused outside a large studio complex, captivated. She had once dreamed of performing on stage, of telling stories, of being seen. But that had been another life, before the silence, before the hunger, before being thrown away. Just as she turned to leave, a group of teenagers exited the studio laughing, one of them holding a guitar. A kind-faced woman trailed behind them, carrying a clipboard. Her eyes fell on Zawadi and she paused. "Hey, sweetheart," she called gently. "Are you okay?" Zawadi hesitated, uncertain whether to flee or speak. But something in that voice felt safe, like the songs her mother once sang. In a voice barely above a whisper, Zawadi replied, "I used to sing, before everything broke." The woman's eyes softened, and after a pause, she reached into her bag and pulled out a flyer. "Nationwide talent search. Tell your story through song. Auditions tonight." Fate, it seemed, had given her one final thread to hold onto. Zawadi's fingers trembled as she took the flyer, her eyes scanning the bold letters and the photo of a shining stage with a microphone at its center. It felt like something from a dream she was no longer allowed to have. The kind woman who introduced herself as Madame Grace was a youth coordinator for Voice of Tomorrow, a televised talent search focused on uncovering raw, undiscovered talent from Kenya's inner cities and rural villages. "You don't need fancy clothes or a background in music," Madame Grace assured her. "You just need a story and a voice." Zawadi wasn't sure she had either. Her throat was raw from cold air and thirst, her spirit cracked from days of rejection, but deep inside she remembered lullabies sung in her mother's arms, remembered church songs on dusty Sundays, remembered how music had once been her way to feel alive. With little more than faith and a whisper of courage, she followed Madame Grace into the glowing studio. There, in a waiting room filled with children in vibrant clothes and hopeful eyes, Zawadi stood out, not because of glamour, but because of her worn sandals, her dusty skirt, and the deep well of pain hiding behind her quiet gaze. When her turn came, the panel of judges looked surprised. "Do you have a backing track?" one asked. Zawadi shook her head. "Do you have a song prepared?" She nodded slowly. And then she sang. She sang with a voice that didn't ask for sympathy, it demanded to be heard. She sang a song she made up on the spot, drawn from her heartbreak, her mother's memory, and the cold sidewalk that had become her home. It was raw. It was imperfect. But it was real. The studio fell silent, and when she finished, one of the judges wiped away a tear. "You're not just a voice," the lead judge said. "You're a story the world needs to hear." That night, her audition clip aired as a teaser across national television and social media, labeled "The Girl with the Soul of a Nation." In hours it was shared by thousands. By morning it had millions of views. Hashtags like hashtag Zawadi the Voice and hashtag Street to Stage began trending across East Africa. And in a modest apartment back in Nairobi, Mama Rhoda sat frozen on the couch, clutching a cup of tea she had yet to sip, staring at the television in disbelief. There, on the screen with her dusty clothes and soulful eyes, was Zawadi, the same girl she had thrown onto the streets without a second thought, now singing in front of the entire nation. The reporter's voice echoed, she was abandoned by her family, now the country is embracing her. In the days that followed, everything changed. Talk shows invited Zawadi to share her journey. Schools and NGOs offered scholarships. Local musicians offered mentorship. Her father, upon seeing the interview, broke down in tears. He had been told by Mama Rhoda that Zawadi had chosen to run away. The truth crushed him. He went searching, begging for a second chance, not just to be her father but to be worthy of her forgiveness. Zawadi met him again, this time backstage at the talent show semi-finals. He knelt before her, tears streaming down his cheeks. I failed you, he said. I let the wrong person tell me who my daughter was. Zawadi didn't speak right away. Instead she hugged him. Not because everything was healed but because forgiveness was her final song. In the final episode of Voice of Tomorrow, Zawadi stepped onto the stage in a bright blue kitenge dress tailored just for her hair braided with gold threads, her smile radiant with strength, not just beauty. The lights dimmed. She performed an original song titled, Bado Niko Hapa. I'm Still Here. The song told the story of abandonment, survival and rediscovery. The crowd wept. The judges stood. And the entire country, from villages with no electricity to high-rise apartments in Nairobi, stood still for the girl who rose from nothing. She won the competition. But more than that, she won her story back. NGOs across Africa started initiatives in her name to protect vulnerable girls. She launched a foundation to provide music programs for street children. And Mama Rhoda? The public backlash forced her to leave town in shame, but Zawadi never spoke a word against her. When asked why, she simply said, if she hadn't thrown me out, I would have never found the world waiting for me outside. Years later, Zawadi would tour internationally, sing for presidents, and release her debut album titled, Thrown Away But Not Broken. But no matter how far she traveled, she never forgot the cracked concrete step in Nairobi where her real voice was born. And as the world applauded her, one truth remained. Zawadi was not a victim of her past, she was the author of her future. A girl once cast aside now stood in the spotlight, not just seen but celebrated.